Hello, family. Welcome back to Can I Get a Witness Wednesday. It's your girl Kenyatta, and tonight we are diving into something real, something that we have all experienced at one point in our lives. We're talking about new norms, missing old routines, and the quiet grief that comes when life shifts in a way that we did not ask for, nor did we expect. Today, I want to talk about those routines that I had with my baby boy, Sean, and how those routines shaped me, stretched me, and stayed with me long after those routines ended. Routines are just habits, they are anchors, and they give our day structure, routine, and meaning, and even a sense of control. They tell our hearts where to land and tell us what to do. Routines shape how we move, how we think, and how we even love. And especially when it comes to those routines that involve somebody that we care about deeply, they actually become a bit sacred. If you think about some people who are in relationships and they're used to the same routines that happen in their lives and how they get up in the morning and how they check in on each other every day during the day, or when an individual happens to be out of town and traveling, and how the other party checks in to make sure that they're okay. Those are routines that ground us, that keep us connected with people. But for me, I'm going to talk about the sacred routines that I had with Sean. We had a little rhythm, and we had fun doing all these things, but we'd have to go to the hospital. I would sit and hold him through diagnostic tests and doctor's appointments, and had to draw blood from his port. And because, I need to know what's happening, I needed to watch his numbers, those white blood cells, red blood cells, the platelets. I just needed to see what was happening with him. So it became a routine for me, right? Living in that cycle of care. They weren't just tasks for me, they were acts of love. I was able to share, with the family what was going on. I was able to keep a journal of what was going on. But they were a way that I showed up for him. I was constant, I was faithful, and I was intentional. But there's a part that made that season even more layered. It was even more emotional. And you say, what could that be? Well, I was doing all of that while caring for a newborn. I had a newborn baby. I was waking up for feedings, changing diapers, rocking this little tiny human to sleep, and then turning around, stepping right into medical mom, also known as Dr. TLC. This is where two worlds were happening all at the same time. There was this one world where it was full of new life and new beginnings and new responsibilities. The other world was full of uncertainty, fear, and the weight of caregiving. Now, don't get me wrong, I did not have a problem caring for my baby, but it was heavy, it was hard, and I had no choice but to figure out how I was going to do this, right? So, can I get a witness that sometimes life doesn't give you seasons at one time? Like we have summer, spring, winter, fall, and even in Ohio, where we get all of those sometimes in the same day. But in life, they were stacked up on me. They stacked joy on top of grief, hope on top of exhaustion, birth on top of loss, all in the same breath. Like, how is this going to happen? How do I survive this? What do I really do? And what I can tell you is that's for another episode. But in the meantime, let's get back to how we deal with grief and how we deal with the grief, or acknowledging, that's better, acknowledging that there is grief behind losing old routines and the power of creating new ones. When those routines ended, the silence was so loud. Now, baby Trey, he was like a little siren. He would go off, and that broke the silence, right? That broke the silence. But the true silence of not doing what I had been doing all along was so loud. And this is where we don't really talk about this. We don't talk about this enough, that sometimes we don't grieve just the person, but we grieve the routines that kept us connected to them. You might say, "Oh, I watched the football game with my buddy," right? Could be my son, my husband, my friend. It could be that, every Thanksgiving we would go to shopping and have lunch, afterwards. Those type of routines, we grieve that time because it was about the time that we were together as well as the person. We grieve the purpose those routines gave us. If I think about the routines I had with Sean, or the routines that I had in different situations, you grieve that part of it because you have to say for yourself, now what am I going to do? Well, who am I going to go with? Am I still going to do these things? Those questions are all up in the air. But we do grieve the identity we held inside of those. Inside of being a mom, inside of being a friend, inside of being a wife or a girlfriend or a family member. We grieve the familiarity, even when those routines were hard, because not all of our routines were easy. And when you're juggling caregiving for a loved one and caring for a newborn at the same time, let me tell you, that grief hits different, because you're not just losing a routine, you're losing a rhythm you built your whole life around. People don't think about that when you're a mom. Like, everything we do is around our kids, whether we choose jobs or we are going to stay at home, or what kind of car we buy. All these things, or various things in our life, all determine what happens in our lives, and that those things are like routines to us. Can I get a witness that losing a routine can feel like losing a piece of yourself? Like, you're like, who am I now? Mom, Dr. TLC, I'm Kenyatta, I don't know. So I'll tell you, we have to come up with some new routines, and there's got to be some power behind these new routines. And this is where the good news comes in. The new routines, they don't erase the old ones. They honor them, because we're building differently. We're realizing what we need out of our lives, and we're not just settling or being a part of something we had before. We get a chance to build new routines. The one thing that I can tell you is that you have to remind yourself that I survived that season, that I learned from that season, and that I'm still growing from that season. New routine gives us permission to breathe again, to rebuild, to rediscover who we are outside the pain. People don't like that part, because you can survive outside the pain. And can I get a witness that even when it's hard, we can create new meanings? We can overcome, we can step into new rhythm and still carry the love from the old one. Let me say that again for you. We can step into a new rhythm, new routines, new norms, and still carry the love from the old one. So let's talk about our new norms. Before we talk about stepping into these new norms, we need to talk about what they are. Because new norms are more than just changes. They are new standards that we set for our lives after a major shift. New norms are the adjustments we make when life forces us into a different season. They're the ways we learn to function, to cope, and to breathe again. New norms are things like setting new expectations for yourself, realizing that you have to protect your peace. You're going to create boundaries like you've never created before. You might even modify some boundaries that you've already established. But the new rhythms we build to survive and then to thrive. We're going to survive and then we're going to thrive. This new mindset that we're going to adopt here gives ourselves permission to live. And one of the largest things that you experience through grief is saying, I cannot live if I don't have that person. It's not okay for me to laugh because I don't have that person. It's not okay for me to go on my life with my life, or am I going to ever find someone else to love me after you grieve that relationship? You are going to thrive and you're going to have permission, and I give you permission to live. New norms don't mean that we forget what the past looks like. They mean that we're learning how to live in the present. Can I get a witness that sometimes the hardest part of this isn't the change itself, but it's accepting that life will never go back to what it was? That's a hard fact to live. But new norms remind us that even in the unfamiliar, we can still find stability. We can find new purpose. We can still find ourselves. So today, if you are navigating new norms, if you are missing the old routines, and it's okay to miss them, if you're feeling that quiet grief that sneaks up on you when you're having a good day, you're not alone. You're human. You're healing, and you're allowed to grow forward. This is Kenyatta, and this has been Can I Get a Witness Wednesday? And I hope today that you found a witness in me and a little more grace for yourself. But remember two things. Everything is going to be all right. And the hardest steps you'll ever take will be the ones that lead you back to yourself. Have a great day.